Most people do not quit investing because they prove that compound interest is false. They quit because the early years feel so underwhelming that they assume they must be doing something wrong. That is a very different problem. The mathematics are sound. Human patience is not. I have spent a great deal of my life thinking about compounding, and I do not mean only in the narrow financial sense. Money compounds, knowledge compounds, trust compounds, judgment compounds, bad habits compound too, which is why a person can slowly become richer or slowly become trapped while barely noticing the daily movement at all. Compounding is one of the most powerful forces in life precisely because it is so quiet in the beginning. That quietness is what defeats people. They expect fireworks. What they get instead is a long period that feels almost insulting. A few $100s here, a few thousand there. A month of discipline that seems to move nothing. A year of restraint that barely looks visible when placed next to a lifetime's worth of bills, ambitions, and social pressure. Then they look up and ask a dangerous question: is this even worth it? That question has kept more people poor than any recession. It sounds reasonable. It is usually just short-term emotion pretending to be analysis. If I could teach one thing to any ordinary worker trying to build wealth, it would be this: the early stage of compounding is not supposed to feel impressive. That does not mean the machine is broken. It means the machine is small, and small machines do not look powerful until they've had time and fuel. There is a minimum size below which compounding is technically working but emotionally invisible. That is what nobody tells you clearly enough. People show you the chart at the end. They show a tiny sum turning into a huge pile over decades. They do not show you the first 10 years when the same process often looks like a joke. That omission matters because it creates a false expectation. A person starts doing the right thing, sees only modest movement, and concludes the promise was exaggerated. Then he quits right before the process was about to become meaningful. That is not a market failure. That is a behavioral failure caused by bad framing. The first thing to understand is that compounding has a size problem. The larger the base, the more visible the return. The smaller the base, the more the owner's contributions dominate the whole picture. The source text makes that point directly with examples like $50 per month compounding to figures that are technically real but still feel too small to change daily life, while the same return rate on much larger balances suddenly becomes meaningful. Faithful site Fay turn 63 file 0 Fay, that is the arithmetic most people never sit with long enough. They hear 8% and imagine 8% is the story. It is not the story. 8% of a tiny pile is still tiny. A return rate does not rescue small scale from being small scale. This is why I smile when beginners ask whether they should chase 15% or 20% annual returns from some exciting asset while they are starting from almost nothing. I understand the hunger. They want movement. They want visible proof. They do not want to spend a decade feeling like they are carrying a bucket of water toward a forest fire, but higher returns on a small balance often matter less than people think, and they usually come with far more risk than the owner has the emotional strength to tolerate. If you earn 15% on $2,000, you have not changed your life. If you increase your monthly contribution by a few $100s, you may have changed your whole trajectory. That is the kind of sentence people resist because it is too ordinary to feel like a secret. Ordinary does not mean weak. Most great financial truths are ordinary. They only look unspectacular because people prefer advice that flatters fantasy. I have never made my money by flattering fantasy. I have made it by respecting arithmetic. So let us respect arithmetic for a moment. A person who invests $50 a month at a sensible long-run equity return may indeed accumulate something respectable after decades. Fine, but if after 10 years the account still feels too small to alter his life, and if the psychological experience of those 10 years is discouragement, then many people will not stay long enough to receive the later reward. The source text explicitly argues that there is a contribution threshold below which compounding feels almost pointless for the first 10 to 15 years, and that this is why many people give up. Fay file site Fay turn 63 file 0 Fay. This is the human problem, not the math itself. The human problem is that we are not built to feel loyal to invisible progress. We are built to seek feedback. We work out and want to see a stronger body soon. We work and want to see a larger paycheck soon. We save and want to see a larger balance soon. When the balance barely moves in a way we can feel, the primitive part of the brain starts negotiating. Maybe later, maybe after this trip, maybe after the car is handled, maybe after the holiday season, maybe after I make more later, is where compounding goes to die. Later is one of the most expensive words in finance. The great misunderstanding is that people think the strategy is compound interest itself. It is not. Compound interest is the reward. The strategy is contribution growth. The strategy is increasing the amount of capital entering the machine every month until the machine becomes large enough to have its own visible gravity. The source text states this point very plainly by saying that in the early years your contributions matter more than your returns, and that the fastest way to reach the point where compounding feels real is to grow your monthly contribution amount. Fay Felicite, Fay turns 63, file 0 Fay. That distinction is enormously important. If a person understands it early, he stops asking the wrong question. He stops asking, what investment will give me the highest return right now? He starts asking, how do I build the pile fast enough that a sensible return begins to matter? Those are completely different questions. The first question tempts you into speculation. The second pushes you toward behavior, earning power, cost control, and regular ownership of productive assets. One path feels exciting, the other usually works. I have always preferred what works. The way I would frame it is simple. There are two engines in the early journey. The first engine is you, your paycheck, your restraint. Your willingness to save when the social world keeps inviting you to display your success instead. Your ability to delay vanity purchases. Your ability to say no to comforts that are not actually comforts. Only expensive ways of feeling current. The second engine is compounding. At first it is a very weak engine. It whispers. It contributes a little. It exists. Yes, but it is not doing the heavy lifting you are. That can feel humiliating if you misunderstand the stage. If you understand the stage correctly, it becomes liberating. It tells you exactly where to focus. Do not waste the early years trying to coax miracles from the return side. Win on the input side. Win on the amount you contribute. Win on the consistency. Win on your ability to avoid lifestyle expansion while the base is still small. This is one reason I have always admired people who understand the dignity of an unglamorous beginning. A person living below his means in his 20s or 30s or even in his 40s, if that is when he finally wakes up, may look ordinary to the world. He may even look deprived to people whose standard of comparison is almost entirely visual. They are often the same people who later say, I do not know how he pulled ahead. He pulled ahead because he respected the input side before the output side became flattering. That is the whole mystery. There is also a psychological threshold embedded in all this. At first you feel like you are doing nearly all the work. That feeling is accurate. If your account grows by $40 from market returns and you contributed $200 yourself, then you did most of the work that month. The source text uses a similar example to show that the investor initially feels like he did more than 80% of the work, and that this gradually changes only after the balance grows. Fay file site Fay turn 63 file 0 Fay. This is where the middle stage begins to matter. Over time the return component grows, not because the market suddenly became kinder, because the base became larger. At $50,000, an ordinary annual return begins to look like a few $100s a month. At $100,000, it begins to look like real monthly money. Now the account starts participating in your future. In a way you can feel that is the shift. It is not magic. It is scale. The source text points to roughly $100,000 to $150,000 as the zone where people begin to feel that compounding has become real because the annual return starts producing meaningful dollar results. Fay file site Fay turn 63. File 0 Fay. I want to linger here because this is the point almost everyone misreads. They think the compounding phase begins because they finally found the right investment. Often it begins because they finally built a large enough base and stayed long enough. That is a much less flattering explanation, which is one reason people dislike it. They would rather believe in secrets than in persistence. Persistence is not exciting enough for the ego. It is still how most wealth is built. Now, if you want practical direction rather than philosophy, I would say the following. Treat the early years as a contribution race, not a return race. That means your first great financial skill is not stock selection. It is increasing the number that goes into the account each month, and there are only so many ways to do that. Spend less, earn more, automate the transfer. Refuse to let every raise become proof that you should upgrade your lifestyle. Sell what you do not need. Take the side work if it is sensible. Build the skill that makes your labor worth more over time. There is no glamour in that list. There is a great deal of money in it. The source text even gives a very simple and very useful example, showing that doubling a monthly contribution from something like $150 to $300 has a dramatically larger long-term effect than many people expect. Fay file site Fay turn 63 file 0 Fay. That is because small recurring increases compound in two ways. They add more capital immediately, and they accelerate the date on which the account becomes large enough for compounding to become visible. That is double leverage. This is why I've always thought your own earning power is your best investment in the earliest phase. Not because the stock market is bad, because when your base is tiny, your labor and your skill development are still the biggest drivers of your future. An additional certification, a better negotiation, a different employer, a side skill, a willingness to read while others numb themselves. These things can raise the monthly contribution far more reliably than chasing some speculative asset for a miraculous return. The market can help you later in proportion to the size of the pile you build. First, you must build the pile. That means living with a kind of temporary asymmetry. You work very hard. The visible result looks small, that is painful, but pain is not always evidence of misdirection. Sometimes it is evidence that the scale has not yet caught up to the effort. The source material keeps returning to this uncomfortable truth by showing that low contributions may technically work over a very long horizon but remain emotionally unsatisfying for many years, which is exactly why people stop. Fay file a site, Fay turn 63, file 0 Fay. This is where systems become more important than motivation. People romanticize discipline as though discipline means waking up every morning, full of noble intention. That is childish. Real discipline is engineering. You make the right thing automatic enough that your moods cannot vote every month. If you wait to invest whatever is left over at the end of the month, you will discover that human beings have an astonishing talent for arranging that very little is left over. The source text makes this same point very directly by saying the investment contribution should be treated like a fixed bill, rather than whatever remains at month end. Fay file site, Fay turn 63, file 0 Fay I. Agree completely. Pay your future first. Not because that sounds nice, because the present always knows how to spend. The future never gets a fair hearing unless you protect its claim in advance. That means automatic transfers on payday. That means deciding in advance what percentage of every raise goes to the future. That means refusing to let a temporary income increase become permanent fixed cost expansion. That is how you build a pile. Not through dramatic decisions once a year, through dull correct behavior every month. Dull correct behavior is one of the great hidden superpowers in finance. Now I should say something about comparison because it is one of the most poisonous forces in the early stage. The internet is full of people showing you chapter 15 while you are living chapter 1. They show the portfolio throwing off thousands a month. They show the account growth. They show the calm. They do not show the decade where nothing felt like it was working. They do not show the years where every contribution seemed too small to matter. They do not show the periods when they questioned themselves privately and kept buying anyway. That is why comparison is so dangerous. It lets you compare your slow invisible build against someone else's late visible outcome and then conclude that the process must not work for you. Nonsense, you are not seeing the same stage. The source text explicitly warns against comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 15. And that line is more useful than people realize. Fay file site, Fay turn 63, file 0 Fay. You must become loyal to your own stage. That is another way of saying you must understand what the stage requires. The early stage requires volume of contribution, not admiration. The middle stage requires patience and consistency, while the split between your contributions and the account. As returns start shifting, the later stage requires protection against your own temptation to get clever, overconfident, or bored. Each phase has its own danger. The early phase danger is quitting. The middle phase danger is overreaching because the process begins to flatter you. The later phase danger is messing up something that had become beautifully simple. I have seen all three, and the first is by far the most common because the first is where discouragement lives. So if I were designing a practical plan for an ordinary person right now, it would look something like this. First, kill the bad debt. No compounding plan deserves oxygen while a credit card company is eating you alive at absurd rates. Second, build enough cash reserve that one ugly surprise does not force you to liquidate your investments or stop contributing. Third, automate a fixed monthly contribution into a broad, low-cost equity fund. Fourth, increase that contribution whenever income rises, even if only by $50 at a time. The source text specifically suggests using small repeated increases like $50 as the way to grow the machine steadily. Fay file a site, Fay turn 63, file 0. Fay $50 may not sound like much. That is why it matters. People are willing to commit to small increases. Small increases repeated become enormous. That is how compounding behaves and also how habit behaves. A little more each month. A little more next year. A little less waste. A little more ownership. You do not need one heroic gesture. You need a long series of almost boring upgrades. If you do that, then one day the account starts speaking in a new voice. The return line gets louder. The monthly movement feels more substantial. You begin to understand why the wealthy seem to get richer without trying quite so hard. They are not breaking the laws of math, they are benefiting from size. The source text says this openly, noting that at larger balances the same return percentage produces sums that feel economically real. Fay file a site, Fay turn 63, file 0 Fay, that is the entire point scale turns the same return rate into a different lived experience. At $5,000, the annual return is a whisper. At $500,000, it can feel like another worker in the house. The return rate did not change. The pile changed. That is why your first serious objective is not to get rich in the abstract. It is to get to meaningful mass. The source text locates that meaningful mass roughly in the $100,000 to $150,000 range, with the broader compounding phase becoming much more visible, somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 depending on contribution level and time horizon. Fay file a site, Fay turn 63, file 0, Fay turn 63, file 1 Fay. I think that is a very useful way to think, not because the exact number is holy, because the idea is holy. There is a point where the machine begins helping you in a way you can feel. Before that point, you are mostly carrying the machine. After that point, the machine begins sharing the work. That is psychologically transformative. It changes how patient you feel. It changes how much confidence you have. It changes whether you treat investing as sacrifice or as ownership. But you do not arrive there by demanding early validation. You arrive there by refusing to quit during the quiet years. That is the real challenge. And it is why I get impatient with people who speak about compounding as though it were some magical fairy dust you sprinkle over a tiny contribution and then wait to become rich. Number compounding is real and powerful, but it responds best to mass, time, and consistency. You cannot skip the mass. You cannot skip the time. You cannot skip the consistency. What you can do is stop misunderstanding the early years. That alone would save millions of people from abandoning the process. If a person only contributes $50 a month for a long time, the process will be real but slow. Fine, then the real task is not to lie to him about how exciting it will feel. The real task is to help him find a way to contribute more. That may mean earning more, that may mean cutting waste, that may mean refusing lifestyle inflation, that may mean moving housing costs down, transportation costs down, ego costs down. It may mean reading instead of scrolling, learning instead of numbing, working a little more now so that money can eventually work instead. I have no issue telling people the plain truth. The early phase is not won by return optimization. It is won by contribution growth. That is the truth. And the moment the pile gets large enough, then the reward appears. Not as magic as delayed visibility. The machine was always working. Now it is loud enough for you to hear it. If I could condense all of this into one sentence, it would be this. In the beginning, you are the engine. Your labor, your savings rate, your discipline, and your ability to direct more money into ownership are doing most of the work. The job is to get to meaningful mass as fast as responsibly possible. Only after that does compounding begin to feel like the powerful tailwind people always promised. The source text describes this directly by separating the process into a contribution phase and a compounding phase, with the shift occurring only after the balance becomes large enough. Fay file site, Fay turn 63, file 0, Fay turn 63, file 1, Fay so no. I would not tell an ordinary person to chase the cleverest investment. I would tell him to become more dangerous on the input side. Become the kind of person who can raise contributions. Become the kind of person who can automate them. Become the kind of person who is not hypnotized by early boredom. Become the kind of person who uses a broad productive vehicle rather than trying to become a genius before he has even become consistent. That is how real wealth is built for most people. Quietly, not romantically, not in a straight line, and never as fast as the salesman promised, but still very powerfully if the owner understands what stage he is in and what that stage actually requires. The world keeps selling the dream of shortcuts because shortcuts are easier to package. I would rather sell the truth. The truth is slower at first and stronger later. The truth says the charts were not lying, but they were leaving out the emotional cost of the early years. The truth says the first phase feels unfair because you are doing almost all the lifting yourself. The truth says that is not proof of failure. It is proof that you are still below the level where compounding can announce itself. The truth says your monthly contribution matters more than your return rate when your balance is small. The truth says increasing the contribution is often far more powerful than chasing exotic returns. The truth says the pile must reach a certain size before the percentages become economically meaningful. And the truth says the people who eventually look lucky usually spent years looking unremarkable while building that pile. I like truths like that because they are useful. They do not flatter. They guide. That is what I would want any ordinary saver to understand. Do not ask only whether compounding is real. Ask whether you have built enough mass, enough time, and enough consistency for it to become visible. If not, do not lose faith in the machine. Feed it more intelligently, then wait. Waiting is not glamorous. It is still the price. And if you pay that price long enough, the same process that once looked too small to matter begins to look like the most important financial force in your life. That is when people say it finally started working. The truth is that it was working all along. You just had not yet built enough to feel it.